Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In New York, there were rumors circulating, whispers exchanged between financiers and politicians, stories told in half-hearted tones at society dinners. Everyone was talking about a man who was never really seen, but whose influence was felt everywhere, the secret director general. Some claimed he was the head of a sprawling empire, controlling chains of hotels, restaurants, and discreet companies scattered across the United States. Others said he started as a simple waiter before building an empire through extraordinary intelligence and cold determination. But no one really knew his face. In his establishments, he was always present, but under a different identity. He could be an anonymous customer in a corner of the restaurant, a discreet delivery person, or even a passing manager. His goal was always the same: observe the truth of his businesses from the inside, without the trappings that his billionaire status would offer him. That night, he had chosen to be a temporary room manager, a role that allowed him to see the workings of one of its most prestigious restaurants, the Golden Flame, a chic Manhattan establishment. In the eyes of the staff, he was just a strict and elegant man, named Michael Reynolds, responsible for ensuring the smooth running of the service. They were unaware that behind this banal name was one of the most powerful men in the country. Michael Reynolds was known for his coldness, his gestures were measured, his gaze piercing. He never spoke more than necessary. He was described as a man impossible to read, capable of inspiring respect and fear with a simple silence. But what no one knew was that Michael hadn't come tonight just to monitor the numbers or the service, that he was looking for something, or rather, someone. He had learned that some of his employees suffered injustice, humiliation, and sometimes worse. And that evening, as he walked down the hall to the kitchen, he would hear a voice that would change the course of his life. A stifled sob. A quiet cry, but filled with sincere pain. Michael stopped dead in his tracks. It wasn't the sound of a broken plate, nor a trivial argument. It was naked, fragile, human sadness. He approached quietly the swinging door leading to the kitchen. There, in the shadows, a young waitress, her face buried in her hands, was letting tears fall as she tried to stifle them. He stood still, watching in silence. And, without knowing it yet, this moment was going to turn his life upside down, as it would hers. Michael Reynolds walked down the narrow hallway that led to the back of the restaurant, the Golden Flame. The service was in full swing. The room echoed with the clinking of glasses, stifled bursts of laughter, and the rustling of white tablecloths. Everything seemed perfect, as always. But Michael knew that behind that shiny facade, every restaurant hid shadows. He had always been wary of appearances. That's why he preferred to live in the shadows, blending into the daily lives of his employees, observing their actions, listening to their conversations. Tonight, dressed in his impeccable dark suit, sober tie, and polished shoes, he embodied the role of general manager, overseeing the department. No one saw him as the secret billionaire who controlled this empire. As he was about to go to his makeshift office at the end of the corridor, a noise stopped him. A quiet sound, almost drowned out by the din of the kitchen's stifled sob. He frowned. Michael knew this kind of sound. He had heard it once, in his own childhood marked by harshness and humiliation. It wasn't the cry of a capricious child, nor the anger of a frustrated employee. No. It was the silent cry of an exhausted soul. Driven by a hunch, he slowed his pace and approached the swinging kitchen door. Pushing it open slightly, he caught a glimpse of the scene. In a corner, crouched behind a cart full of dishes, a young woman was trembling. Her apron was stained with spilled coffee, her messy brown hair escaping from its bun. Her slender hands tried to wipe away the tears that rolled down despite her. Michael stood still, his gaze fixed on her. He knew he shouldn't intervene too quickly. Tears sometimes needed to be respected. But he also couldn't just walk away as if nothing had happened. A cook's voice rang out in the distance. "Emily. We need you for table 8. The young woman jumped, ran her hands quickly over her cheeks to hide the traces of her grief, and stood up with difficulty. She took a deep breath, forcing a pained smile onto her lips. But her eyes still betrayed her pain. Emily Carter. Michael knew her name because he knew all of her employees. A 23-year-old waitress, discreet, punctual, often described as courageous despite her fragile appearance. He knew she was new to the company, but until tonight he hadn't known the weight she was carrying. As she walked past him, head down, Michael stopped her with a gesture. "Just a moment, Miss Carter." She froze, looking up at him with reddened eyes. Her voice trembled slightly as she answered. "Yes, Mr. Reynolds." Michael studied her for a second. Her posture, her gaze, everything indicated a distress she was trying to hide. But he chose his words carefully. "You look exhausted. Take a few minutes before returning to the room." Emily shook her head sharply, as if the very idea of slowing down was forbidden to her. "No. I can continue. I don't want to lose my place." This simple but revealing sentence struck Michael right in the heart. Why was she so afraid of losing this job? He could have asked him. But he contented himself with a pointed, almost benevolent look, contrasting with his reputation as a cold man. "Do as you wish," he said in a deep voice. "But know that I see more than you think." Emily stared at him, bewildered. Her lips parted as if to reply, but no words came out. She finally looked away and quickly walked back into the room, leaving behind a question that was now burning in Michael's mind. He knew he had to find out what was behind those tears. For in his experience, this kind of pain was never without a root cause. And for Michael Reynolds, every cause had a consequence. Emily Carter walked briskly into the restaurant, tray in hand, a forced smile on her face. Every gesture was perfectly executed, every word polite, but behind the professional facade, her heart was pounding. She worried that someone had noticed her tears, that her grief had betrayed her fragility. For 3 months, the golden flame had become his lifeline. The salary, though modest, allowed him to keep a roof over his head and pay for his little sister, Lily's medication. At only 23, Emily carried a weight that few would have borne. Her mother had died 5 years earlier, taken by a sudden illness. Her father, unable to bear the pain, had sunk into alcoholism before disappearing for good. Emily, still a teenager, found herself responsible for her 8-year-old sister. She had dropped out of school to work in cafes, convenience stores, sometimes even 2 jobs at once. Today, Lily was 13. A lively, intelligent, but fragile little girl. She suffered from a chronic respiratory illness that required regular and expensive care. Emily fought every day to find the money she needed, refusing to let her sister lack anything. But at the restaurant, his daily life was not easy. The room manager, Mark Benson, a man in his 40s with a predatory smile, seemed to take a malicious pleasure in putting her down. From the moment she arrived, he had pigeonholed her: too young, too poor, not confident enough. "Hurry up, Carter, do you think the customers have time to wait?" he would call out regularly, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. Emily took the money without replying. She knew Mark had his preferences. The waitresses he liked received better hours, while the others, like her, found themselves working themselves to exhaustion. That evening again, Mark had humiliated her in front of everyone, blaming her for a mistake she hadn't made. And it was in that corner of the kitchen, under the pressure and exhaustion, that she had cracked. On the way home late that night, Emily took the subway to her small Brooklyn apartment. She clutched her purse, making sure the few bills from her tip remained intact. Every dollar counted. As she pushed open the door to her apartment, the familiar smell of warmed soup greeted her. Lily, sitting on the old sofa, looked up at her with a big smile despite her paleness. "You're home. I waited to show you my drawing." Emily put down her bag and sat down next to her sister, admiring the colorful paper. It was a house with 2 figures holding hands. "It's us," Lily said proudly. "And you see, I designed a garden because, one day, you promised me we'd have a real house with a garden." Emily felt her eyes mist over. She smiled despite the lump in her throat. "Yes, my dear, one day we will have it." But inside, she wondered how much longer she could hold out. Her debts were piling up, and Mark was already threatening to cut her hours if she made the slightest mistake. She was living on a tightrope, ready to collapse at the slightest breath of wind. What she didn't know was that tonight, in the shadows of the restaurant, someone had seen his tears and decided not to forget them. Michael Reynolds, the secretive CEO, had just added a new name to his list of concerns: Emily Carter. The next evening, the restaurant The Golden Flames shone brightly. Chandeliers illuminated the elegant room, and the customers, dressed in suits and evening gowns, savored the illusion of perfection offered to them. In this world of luxury, the staff worked like invisible cogs in a great machine. Michael Reynolds stood motionless by the counter, watching every move. Behind his mask of cold authority, he stared at a specific target: Emily Carter. Since the day before, her image had been imprinted on his mind. The tears, the forced smile, the fear in her voice. He knew how to recognize hidden distress. Emily, meanwhile, was trying to survive another evening of duty. Mark Benson, true to form, never missed an opportunity to put the pressure on her. "Carter. Faster than that. Do you think the customers are here to admire your slowness?" The other servers looked down. No one dared to intervene, for fear of becoming the next target. Emily took it with her head down, but her flushed face betrayed deep humiliation. Michael clenched his jaw. He'd seen this kind of behavior too often, petty bosses who thought they ruled over tiny empires. But tonight, he decided not to stand by and watch. When the service slowed down for a moment, he approached Emily. "Miss Carter," he said in a low but firm voice. "Come with me." She jumped, surprised by the curt order. Her first instinct was fear. Had she made a mistake? Was she going to lose her job? Michael's icy stare didn't reassure her. She nodded and followed him, crossing the room under the curious gaze of her colleagues. He led her into a small office in the back, away from the hustle and bustle. A plain room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a lamp. Michael closed the door behind them, then turned to face her. "Sit down." Emily obeyed, uncomfortably. Her hands were shaking slightly. She looked up at him and whispered, "Did I do something wrong, Mr. Reynolds?" Michael was silent for a moment, his piercing gaze fixed on her. Then he slowly shook his head. "No. But you're carrying a weight. I saw it last night." Emily stiffened. Her fingers gripped her apron. "It was nothing, just tired," she replied quickly. "I'm fine." Michael leaned back against the desk, crossing his arms. His voice became softer, almost unexpected coming from him. "You know, Miss Carter, I don't believe in tears without cause. No one cries like that without a serious reason." Emily looked down, ashamed. She'd always learned to hide her injuries, to show nothing. Bosses didn't like fragile employees. But there was something different in Michael's voice, an authority that didn't judge, but scrutinized. She took a deep breath, searching for words. "I just have a lot to deal with. But I can't afford to lose this job. It's all I have." Michael watched every tremor in her voice, every hesitation. She wasn't telling the whole story, he knew that. But he decided not to press the issue. "Not yet." "Very well," he said finally. "I have no intention of sending you away, if that's what you're afraid of. But you should know this: I notice what others don't. And I don't forget." Emily looked up in surprise. For the first time, she saw something other than coldness in his eyes, a glimmer of sincerity. But wary, she simply nodded and stood up, ready to return to the dining room. Before she left, Michael added, "A word of advice: never let anyone convince you that you are worth less than you are." Emily stood there for a second, struck by these words. Then she left, confused. In the office, Michael remained alone. His instincts told him that Emily Carter was hiding a burden far greater than she admitted. And for some reason he still couldn't explain, he knew he was about to discover the truth. In the brilliant and hushed universe of Golden Flame, everything seemed perfect in the eyes of the customers. Plates came out of the kitchen like works of art, wines flowed elegantly, and every server's smile gave the illusion of impeccable service. But behind this glossy facade lurked another reality, known only to the staff. A reality filled with pressure, humiliation, and secrets. At the heart of this shadow was Mark Benson, the dining room manager. Arrogant 40-something, overly tight suit, predatory smile that never inspired confidence. In front of the customers, he was charming, almost saccharine. But as soon as the dining room door closed behind him, his true face appeared, cold, cruel, and greedy. Since his arrival, he has imposed his law on the employees. New recruits were subjected to his sarcasm, and those who tried to complain mysteriously saw their hours reduced to the point of being forced to resign. Emily Carter regularly paid the price. One evening, after serving a table without fail, Mark called out to him sharply in the kitchen. "Carter, come here." Emily approached, her hands clenched around her tray. "Yes, sir." Mark held up an order ticket and waved it in front of her. "You forgot to note the doneness of table 10's steak," the customer complained. "Do you think that's acceptable?" Emily blanched. She knew she hadn't taken that order. "But, it wasn't me who." He interrupted her abruptly, his voice rising in pitch. "Do you want to talk? Do you want me to tell Reynolds you can't manage a table?" Emily fell silent. She knew protesting would only make things worse. So she looked down and nodded. "No, sir." Mark smiled, pleased with her submission. "Good. Then do your job properly. Otherwise, you know what awaits you." She left with a lump in her throat, while her colleagues looked away. No one dared to stand in Mark Benson's way. What Emily didn't know was that Michael Reynolds had witnessed the scene, hidden a few meters away. His dark gaze followed Mark, and a cold anger rose within him. But it wasn't just Mark's cruelty that aroused his suspicions. Michael, in his role as general manager, had noticed inconsistencies in the restaurant's accounts for several weeks: inflated invoices, fictitious orders, discrepancies in wine stocks. All of this pointed to a carefully orchestrated embezzlement of money. And Michael knew that Mark Benson was the key. One evening after closing time, Michael stayed in his makeshift office later than usual. The kitchen was silent, the dining room plunged into darkness. He leafed through the restaurant's financial records, his fingers running over the numbers. The evidence was clear: Mark wasn't just abusing his employees. He was also stealing from the business. But what struck him even more was that Emily seemed to be one of the victims of this system. She had the worst hours, the least generous tables, and suffered unjustified deductions from her tips. Michael closed the register with a sharp gesture. There were shadows in that restaurant. And it was time to turn on the light. Most of the employees of the Golden Flame knew Michael Reynolds as a strict, reserved, and elusive man. To them, he was simply a general manager sent by the owners to oversee the smooth running of the establishment. But the truth was, no one suspected it. Michael Reynolds was not just a leader. He was the hidden owner, the man behind the empire. A past erased. Born in a working-class neighborhood of Chicago, Michael grew up in a world marked by poverty and violence. His father, a factory worker, came home exhausted every night, and his mother worked as a waitress in a small, seedy diner. Michael had often seen his mother come home with red eyes, after being humiliated by customers and shouted at by her boss. These memories had left a deep impression on him. As a teenager, he decided he would never again let someone he loved go through that kind of treatment. He worked tirelessly, picking up odd jobs while secretly studying economics and management. At 20, he started his first business, a small food distribution company. In 10 years, he had built an empire. But unlike other businessmen, he chooses absolute discretion. His businesses were run by nominees, his hotels and restaurants seemed to belong to invisible investors. Michael himself never appeared in the media. In the eyes of the world, he did not exist. And yet, his power was real. A double life. Michael had developed a strange habit, mingling anonymously in his own establishments. Sometimes as a simple customer, sometimes as a passing employee, or even as a general manager sent by the parent company. This allowed him to see the truth, to feel the reality experienced by his employees. This is how he discovered embezzlement, misappropriation, injustices, and how he discreetly removed corrupt managers. But he had never felt so concerned as since he saw Emily Carter crying in the kitchen. He surprised himself. Why did this young woman affect him so much? Perhaps because she reminded him of his mother, bent under the weight of her debts, but always standing up for her children. Perhaps also because he saw in Emily a hidden strength, a silent courage that deserved better than the life she was being given. That evening, in his luxurious apartment overlooking Manhattan, Michael stood in front of the bay window, a drink in his hand. The city shone beneath his feet, a reflection of his power and wealth. But his mind remained fixed on a tired face, that of Emily Carter. He had the means to change his life with the snap of his fingers. To pay off his debts, to fund his sister's care, to give her a new life. But he knew Emily would never accept charity. Her pride and dignity would prevent her from reaching out. So he decided on one thing: he would find out the whole truth about her, without revealing yet who he really was. And then he would find a way to help her, even if it meant pitting him directly against Mark Benson. Setting down his glass, Michael made a silent promise to himself. This time, I won't just observe. I'll protect. And for the first time in a long time, the cold, secretive man felt an emotion he thought lost, a budding attachment. The next morning, the hotel was as resplendent as ever. Guests, dressed in elegant suits and evening gowns, were coming downstairs for breakfast. Smiles, hushed conversations, and the clinking of cutlery mingled in an atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the inner storm Emily was experiencing. She had worked all night, completing her tasks with an almost mechanical rigor. Her reddened eyes betrayed her lack of sleep, but no one seemed to notice, or perhaps they chose to look the other way. In the world of luxury hotels, staff problems had no place in front of guests. David Morgan, sitting discreetly in a corner of the hotel restaurant, watched the scene. Since their meeting in the kitchen, he had been thinking about the distress he had seen in the young woman's eyes. He, who usually kept his distance from his employees' private lives, felt that this time he could not simply remain a spectator. He noticed how Emily forced herself to smile as she served customers, how she bowed her head at every remark, no matter how trivial. An incredible strength seemed to restrain her emotions, but he also perceived the fragility behind that mask. Later that morning, as he walked down the hall to the administrative offices, he saw Emily chatting briefly with a man in a security uniform. The man, arrogant and brusque, spoke in a sharp tone. "You forgot to report the closing time again last night. Be careful, Emily. The next mistake will not be forgiven." Emily apologized immediately, lowering her voice like a scolded child. David frowned. He knew this agent, Charles Becker, an employee known for his excessive rigidity and his sometimes demeaning manner towards female staff. David felt a pang of indignation rise within him. But he refrained from intervening immediately. His role was not to air a conflict in public. He knew he needed to understand the whole story before acting. That evening, he discreetly summoned the head of human resources, Martha Collins. In a firm but calm voice, he asked her, "Martha, I want a full report on the working conditions of all staff, especially those in the catering department. And I also want you to review Officer Becker's disciplinary history." Martha looked at him in surprise. Rarely did the CEO get personally involved at this level of detail. But David's tone left no room for discussion. That night, David sat alone in his office, staring at the night view of the city. His mind was torn. Why had Emily affected him so much? Why this sudden need to intervene? Was it simply empathy, or a reflection of a loneliness he refused to admit? Downstairs, in a modest staff room, Emily wept silently. She had received a message from her younger brother, who had been rushed to the hospital due to lack of preventive care. The bills were piling up, and her salary, cut by unfair penalties, was no longer enough. Two souls, in the same hotel, separated by floors, but linked by an invisible thread. David's silence, until then, weighed heavily. But soon, this silence would turn into action. The next morning, the restaurant resumed its usual routine. Customers filed in, plates clattered, and servers busied themselves making everything appear smooth. Yet, beneath this facade, an invisible tension hung in the air. Olivia, despite her fatigue, had regained her dignity. She tied her hair back into a neat bun, put her apron back on, and continued to serve customers with a controlled smile. But deep in her eyes, a new fire shone, that of newfound strength. In his glass-fronted office, Ethan Carter watched discreetly. Since their conversation, he had been thinking non-stop. Olivia's words still echoed in his mind, no one should feel invisible. He now understood that his role as CEO was not limited to managing figures or signing contracts. He carried a human responsibility. At lunch, a wealthy client, known for his arrogance, entered. He snapped his fingers to call Olivia over and spoke to her in a disdainful tone. "Hurry up, that's what you're here for, right?" Ethan's blood boiled. Contrary to his usual quiet behavior, he stood up and walked over to the table. The customers and staff stared after him, surprised to see him intervene. Calmly, he placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder and said to the customer, "Sir, no one here should be treated with contempt. She deserves as much respect as I do, as you do, as anyone sitting in this restaurant." A heavy silence fell. The customer, embarrassed at being publicly put in his place, mumbled a few awkward apologies. Olivia, her eyes misty, whispered a quiet, "Thank you," to Ethan. Later, in the kitchen, the staff crowded around Olivia. Her colleagues, who had often ignored her, were beginning to look at her differently. "You know," murmured Daniel, the head waiter, "we haven't always treated you the way you deserve. But after what we've seen, you're not invisible. Not to us." Olivia felt a warmth rise inside her. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just the forgotten waitress. Ethan, in his office, knew he had crossed a point of no return. He had opened a door he could never close again, the door to the truth. But now one question haunted him: how far did he have to go to protect Olivia and change the culture of this restaurant? The next morning, the Golden Flame, it was quiet, almost eerily quiet. The regular customers were enjoying their coffee, some leafing through their newspapers, others talking in hushed voices. But behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. Ethan Carter knew the time to reveal his truth was approaching. Since his first encounter with Olivia, he had closely observed the injustices, abuses, and embezzlement orchestrated by Mark Benson and a few accomplices within the hotel. He had collected the necessary evidence, taken notes, and planned his strategies. In the staff room, Olivia busied herself preparing lunch orders. She had regained some inner strength, but one worry persisted: the weight of her debts and her sister's fragile health were keeping her on the edge. Ethan approached quietly and called her by her first name. "Olivia, can you come with me for a few minutes?" She nodded hesitantly and followed him to a secluded meeting room. There, he closed the door and looked her straight in the eyes. "Olivia, there's something you need to know," he said slowly. "I'm not just the general manager, you know. I'm the owner of this establishment." Olivia stared at him, her eyes wide, unable to react immediately. Her lips were trembling. You're the owner?" "But I don't understand." Ethan took a deep breath. "I wanted you to discover the truth at the right time. I wanted to make sure you knew that I've been watching you, not to criticize, but to understand. Your courage, your dedication, the way you protect your sister, none of it escaped me." Olivia felt a mixture of confusion and relief wash over her. She remembered the tears of the day before and the discreet attention he had paid to her struggles. And now the truth was out, turning her world upside down. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. "Because," Ethan replied, "I wanted you to be treated fairly by your peers and by Mark, not just helped by me. And because I wanted you to understand that your worth doesn't depend on my help, but on yourself." A silence fell, heavy with meaning. Olivia felt anger and gratitude mingling in a strange mixture. She had been humiliated, exploited, but she had never doubted her own strength. And now, the one she had thought was simply a superior revealed an identity that changed everything. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice trembling. "But I don't know if I can trust you completely." Ethan smiled slightly, understanding her wariness. "I'm not asking for your immediate trust. I'm just asking you to let me protect you, and to allow me to correct what's unjust here." And as the evidence piled up against Mark and his accomplices waited in secure files, Ethan knew the next step would be decisive. The truth was finally coming out, and all that was left was to act. The tension and the golden flame was reaching its peak. Ethan Carter knew the moment of reckoning had arrived. Mark Benson, confident that his manipulations would go unnoticed, continued to order, threaten, and belittle staff, unaware that his fragile empire was crumbling beneath his feet. Ethan had taken every precaution. He had gathered evidence of financial embezzlement, abuse of power, and harassment. Every document, every falsified invoice, every testimony from colleagues was meticulously organized to leave Mark no escape. That morning, as the restaurant prepared for lunch service, Ethan summoned Mark into the main office. The air was thick with tension. The assistants and a few key employees had been quietly briefed and were waiting outside, ready to testify. "Mark," Ethan began in a calm but firm voice, "we need to talk about your conduct within this establishment." Mark raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Oh? And you think I'm not handling things properly here?" "Not only are you not managing properly, you're abusing your position," Ethan continued. "And I have all the evidence to prove it." He placed a thick file on the desk. Mark looked at it, puzzled, then tried to smile, but it quickly faded as he realized he couldn't deny the obvious. "It's not possible," he murmured. "Anything is possible when you observe carefully and keep track of evidence," Ethan replied. "Your harassment of staff, financial embezzlement, unjustified payroll deductions, it's all documented." The office door opened then, and Olivia walked in, alongside a few colleagues, visibly upset but brave. She looked up at Mark and said in a clear voice, "You tried to humiliate us, to exploit us. But we are no longer invisible." Mark tried to say one last word, but the confidence and firmness in Olivia and the others' voices drowned him out. He knew he had lost control. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Mark, your contract ends today. I advise you to leave before the authorities get involved." Humiliated and unable to respond, Mark left the office as the employees watched. The silence that followed was filled with relief and victory. Olivia felt a wave of freedom wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt protected and respected. Ethan turned to her, a slight smile on his lips. "This should never have happened to you, Olivia. But starting today, we're going to change things." And in that moment of silent triumph, the staff of the Golden Flame understood that justice could be restored, even in the darkest corners of a seemingly perfect world. The weeks following Mark Benson's fall were a turning point for the Golden Flame. The atmosphere in the restaurant changed radically. Fear and humiliation gave way to trust, respect, and sincere collaboration among all employees. Olivia Carter, freed from the weight of bullying, regained not only her dignity, but also her inner strength. Customers quickly noticed this change. She served with confidence, a genuine smile on her lips, and a positive energy that lit up the room. Every gesture, every word, demonstrated the resilience she had cultivated despite the challenges. Ethan Carter, now revealed as the owner of the establishment, worked hand in hand with Olivia to reform the restaurant's internal operations. He implemented training on respect and communication, introduced a transparent and fair feedback system, and ensured that no one could ever be humiliated or exploited again. One evening, as the restaurant was closing, Olivia stayed a few minutes to put her things away. Ethan approached and handed her a file. "This includes support for you and your sister," he said. "Medical care, rent, and everything else you'll need. But most importantly, I want you to know that you never have to fight alone again." Olivia, moved to tears, took the file. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Ethan replied gently. "You just have to keep being yourself. And remember that a person's worth isn't measured by what they're put through, but by how strong they get back up. A few months later, the Golden Flame had become more than a restaurant, a place where employees felt valued, respected, and protected. Olivia had regained her confidence and was even able to enroll her sister in a specialized school for her medical needs, giving them a more secure future. In the restaurant's offices, Ethan surveyed the room with a small smile. He knew his mission wasn't just to run a restaurant, but to protect and uplift those who worked under his roof. And he remembered that first night, when Olivia's tears had stopped him in the hallway. Those tears, a source of pain, had been the catalyst for a transformation, a rebirth for Olivia, a lesson in humanity for Ethan, and a renewal for the entire hotel. The Golden Flame now shone for what it was meant to represent, not just luxury and elegance, but dignity, respect, and hope. And in this sometimes cruel world, this truth remained engraved forever: the strength and kindness of ordinary people can change the lives of those around them, even in the most unexpected places.